Chair recognizes Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I have long advocated years ago helping the Free Syria Army when that proposal was put forward. I supported it. I put in a bill 3 years ago to do it, and I think the fact that we didn't do it was a major mistake. So I do agree with your analysis. But I wanted to ask you. Reports have shown that ISIS wants to try to lure the United States into a ground war, into a war that they can fight. After our experience in Iraq, I'm not sure that we are ready to get bogged down into another ground war. It seems that every time we intervene, things seem to wind up worse than they were before. I never thought we would long for the good old days of Saddam Hussein, and he was certainly a bad player. But you look at what's happening now, and you wonder if this is any better, and I would think it's not. And you can say the same thing about intervention in Libya and other places as well. So how can we be sure that we just don't get sucked in again and bogged down in another ground war like Iraq, which I don't think the American people really want or are ready for?
Well, I totally agree with you, and I think most people do that I'm aware of, even those who are even critical of the administration. There are some, but most analysts are not calling for significant ground combat units to go back into Syria and go back into Iraq. Yes, you're right. That would be a plus in terms of what ISIS would make out of that, and they would probably move the remnants of their organization, to Libya or someplace else. But yes, the reality is that I think if we are all in supporting the indigenous forces, and if we put the effort into the political situation with the same intensity and degree that we did in getting the nuclear deal for 3 years. I mean, that was all in political effort. If we make that kind of effort, because the political situation in Syria and the political situation in Iraq actually drive the solutions that we need, not the military solution, not the military situation. The military situation is critical, but so is the political situation. And we need to have that level of intensity and that level of effort to get the kind of political stability we need for the Sunnis to be able to step up in this fight. The second thing is, as I suggested in my testimony, our efforts to support these local indigenous forces has been, in my judgment, very inadequate. To avoid those ground combat brigades ever having been used, that is the answer. At least we have to try what that result gets. And then if we ever had to put combat brigades in there, as I said in my statement, I didn't ignore it, we would only do that in conjunction with an Arab and if NATO's involved, coalition. And we would not be I don't think we should be the majority of the force if that took place. It certainly would be largely an Arab Sunni force to be able to take back these Sunni lands, not the United States combat forces. They would probably like us to be there if it came to that situation with them. And if there was no other alternative, if this was the only way we can do it, then I would agree to doing that as a recommendation. But that's the thing that we truly want to avoid for all the reasons that you suggested. We want to avoid that. And these other options are still available to us to help us avoid that reality.
Thank you. I want to get back to the question about refugees, and I'd like to make a statement and ask anyone to comment on it. I think it's important to point out that Syrian refugees are fleeing precisely the type of senseless violence that occurred in Paris, and slamming the door in the face of victims of terrorism, I think, would be a betrayal of our values. And I believe that we are deeply committed to safeguarding the American public, just as we are committed to providing refuge to some of the world's most vulnerable people. I don't believe that these goals are mutually exclusive or that either has to be pursued at the expense of the other. I'd like anyone who cares to comment on that. Please do so.
I couldn't agree with you more so. We've looked at every jihadi terrorism case in the United States since 9/11, of which there were 330. And in only 2 cases is it clear that refugees were involved, and they were Iraqi refugees who slipped through a process which is nothing like the process that has been described by Director Olson and Ranking Member Thompson, which is much, much more rigorous. And of course, we can't say we're going to just eliminate all risk, because we don't live in that kind of world. On the other hand, imagine the argument when the great wave of Italian immigration came to this country, of which there were millions of people, that we would take no Italians because there was a tiny, tiny chance that one of them was a member of the mafia. This country would be substantially different. So I endorse everything you've had to say. I think your analogy about the St. Louis is right on point.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. King.